Merry Christmas, written by USA Today bestselling author Lexy Timms, copyright 2023 by Lexy Timms, narrated by Kathleen Starr Hall. Chapter 4, December 4th. Coulson walked across the parking lot to meet her. There was an invigorating chill in the late morning air, but he felt his temperature rise as he approached Blair. She leaned against her car, eyebrows furrowed and nose scrunched up as she peered down at the notebook in her hands. She seemed to remember that she needed her glasses, and she quickly fished them out, perching them on her nose to read. There was something endearing about her habits. Coulson found that he liked them. Her quirks added to her allure and her charm, making her utterly irresistible. "We should get out of the cold," he said. "You're right." She shoved the notebook and her glasses into the bag strapped to her shoulder before she started rubbing her gloved hands together to warm them. He suddenly felt the urge to protect her, to make sure that she stayed warm, so he wrapped his arm around her waist, pulling her closer to him as he started to walk towards the hardware store. She exhaled, a surprised shaky sound that turned into a contented sigh. Blair leaned against him like she had yesterday, the sensation of her body setting off his desire. He felt his heart hammer in his chest as he felt the soft curves of her body against him. Clearing his throat, he asked, "Warmer?" "Yes," she responded breathlessly. "Much warmer." Before Coulson could say anything else, he noticed a woman race past them, stopping right under the mistletoe at the hardware store's entrance. "You've got to be kidding me," Blair said under her breath. The woman fluffed her dark hair, pouted, and looked in his direction, a flash of hopeful interest in her eyes. That was when Coulson figured that she was trying to set up a kiss. Pretty shameless, considering he was already walking with Blair. "Still think the tradition is cute?" Blair asked through gritted teeth. "You'd never see something like this in a big city," he said. "No one speaks to each other or looks at a stranger." "They were standing out on a street corner in the cold yesterday," Blair grumbled, "trying to get men's attention. You don't think that's weird?" "It's a little weird, but think about it this way. In a big city, the only women who stand on street corners trying to get a man's attention are the ones you have to pay," he said with a chuckle. "Now, there's nothing wrong with streetwalkers, but this is a nice change of pace." Blair shook her head. "Well, I refuse to do it. I refuse to stand under some mistletoe just to kiss a stranger." She paused, forcing them to stop walking. "Would you kiss a stranger?" "No, I wouldn't," he said. "That young woman has nothing to worry about." "Oh, okay," Blair said, looking at the woman in the entryway. "Neither do I, then." "You're not a stranger anymore, Blair," he said gently. She gasped, turning so that she could stare up at him. He felt the warmth of her body on his arm. Heat burned through all the layers of fabric they wore. The shock on her face started to vanish, a tentative smile forming as the surprise seemed to sink in. So she welcomed his attention. Good. That was a sure sign that he'd stopped putting his damn foot in his mouth. They could stop bickering and start getting to know each other. Obviously, anything physical was off the table, but flirting with her could potentially make up for that. Besides, spending time with Blair had been the most interesting thing about the town by far. She kept him on his toes, kept him guessing. He was never bored with her. Not for a second. "That's nice of you to say," her smile widened. "You can't have too many friends." "Friends?" Coulson almost groaned. As great as it would be for them to get closer, friendship wasn't exactly what he had in mind. Still, maybe her misinterpretation was for the best. It guaranteed that he wouldn't make a big mistake. It also guaranteed a lot more frustration. A frustration that he felt in that moment because she was pressed up against him and there was nothing he could do about it. To make matters worse, she looped her arm around his and started moving again, her proximity driving him insane. When they got to the store entrance, Coulson didn't glance in the strange woman's direction. Best not to lead her on since he wasn't interested. He just kept going, following Blair's lead into the store. The place was already decked out for the holidays. Store employees sported reindeer antlers and Santa hats, while a full aisle was dedicated to Christmas gear. Blair released her hold on him to grab a shopping cart. "Are you still happy taking a tour of a hardware store?" He followed her as she headed to the holiday-themed aisle. "I've never been Christmas shopping, so yeah, I'm happy to take the tour." "Seriously?" Her mouth fell open. "Wait, are you Jewish? Is that why you haven't put up a tree?" Pretty sure they have Hanukkah items further down this aisle if you're interested. Part of my mom's side is, but I'm not really religious, he answered quickly. Better to use having a secular life as an excuse for his Christmas shopping confession. He definitely wasn't going to tell her that. He had never been holiday shopping because he had assistants to do that for him. You've at least shopped online, she suggested. He had assistants to do that for him too. Those assistants were probably buying whatever gifts he was going to be sending to family, friends, employees, and business associates. As always, he had no idea what gifts were being sent out in his name. He'd probably learn what he'd gifted everyone when they inundated him with thank you notes and referenced their presents. Nope. She stopped to frown at him. You've never given anyone a gift. For some reason, Blair sounded disappointed, and it took him a second to realize why. She was used to exchanging gifts, the inexpensive kind that would probably insult his parents. Do gift cards count? He asked, trying to save himself before she decided that he was a selfish asshole. At least the reveal about the gift cards wasn't a total lie. His assistants had given their clients gift cards. Granted, those were gift cards for luxury hotel stays and pricey gadgets, but he was already in too deep to explain it all right now. Sure, I think those count, she said, her frown replaced by a dazzling smile. Especially if it's for something a loved one really cherishes. A gift from the heart is always best, right? He had no idea what a gift from the heart would even look like. Coulson had never given one of those, nor had he ever received one. All of the gifts he got came by way of assistants and servants, same as everybody else in his family. I wouldn't know, he shrugged. Coulson, have you never gotten a Christmas present? She asked, her voice laced with sympathy. Sure I have. Just nothing that anyone put much thought into. His voice trailed off as memories came back to him. He had gotten a gift that someone chose specifically for him. There were all the gifts he'd gotten from his great-grandmother, bicycles, framed photos, and a couple of years ago there had been the pocket watch. He'd known Opal had picked them all herself because she always called when she did, and there was always an accompanying letter with her elegant handwriting, old-fashioned cursive that nobody used anymore. What is it? Nothing. He shook his head. I just remembered that my great-grandmother used to give me things from the heart. That's not nothing, Coulson. That's amazing, she said softly. He heard the sympathy in her voice. Her eyes had softened. His chest tightened as he began to realize that she actually cared. Blair was a kind person with a big heart. She didn't put on a facade or act like she was above it all. Instead, she spoke her mind and showed that she cared about her community. He'd seen her put the money in the stocking unprompted, so he knew she was kind. He knew that after just a handful of days. He'd meant what he'd said earlier. She was no longer a stranger. But it was more than that. Coulson was starting to feel like he'd known her all his life. That was why he felt the sudden urge to confess everything. The urge to tell her that he wasn't from an ordinary family, despite the Bennets having strong ties to Mislin Bush. Even with his family's connection to the town, he understood the unease people felt about upper-class dynasties like the one his family represented. Wealth and power made people react in strange ways sometimes. Even other wealthy people acted weird about it. Some people got greedy, trying to ingratiate themselves to get whatever they wanted from the Bennets. Others freaked out and kept their distance, wrongly thinking they weren't good enough to be in his circle. He tried to guess how Blair might take it. She was a good person, which meant that instead of getting closer, she might pull away from him. It was pretty obvious that she hated snobbery and pretension, the exact qualities that made his parents who they were. They'd look down their noses at a sweet, open-hearted, down-to-earth person like Blair. And in kind, Blair didn't seem like the type to jump through hoops to try and impress a couple of snobs. Yeah, it is amazing when you think about it, he finally said. Tell me about her, Blair said. I'd love to know more about your family. The urge to come clean was overwhelming. It shouldn't matter. His family fortune didn't have to be a big deal. But Coulson was discovering that for the first time in years. He genuinely cared what a woman thought of him. He wanted Blair to think highly of him because that meant he might actually have a chance, which was dangerous and idiotic, considering that he didn't do relationships. And even if he did, Coulson lived way out of town. His attraction to Blair had to be temporary at best. A couple of weeks from now, they'd be out of each other's lives for good. Except the urge to come clean didn't die down. He had to tell her something, even if it wasn't the whole truth. He could at least give her an answer and explain why he was in town in the first place. My great-grandmother was an incredible woman, he told her. She's the reason I'm here in town. Wow, really? Blair leaned closer, eager to hear more about his life. Despite Coulson getting personal in the coffee shop, she sensed that he typically held back. Based on his frequent bouts of arrogance, it probably wasn't like him to admit to a vulnerability like displeasing his parents. That was probably why he was able to project so much confidence. Confidence was a great way to hide other things. Yeah, she was my dad's grandmother, but I think I was closer to her than Dad was. Coulson started to slowly push the shopping cart forward. Blair suspected he was using the move as a tactic to distract from how personal the conversation was getting. Well, she wasn't going to be distracted. She could give him her undivided attention while moving up the store aisle. Sounds like she meant a lot to you, Blair said, taking hold of the shopping cart from him. Yeah, she died earlier this year. He shoved his hands into his jacket pockets as he walked with her. Her heart clenched in sympathy for him. What? Oh, Coulson, I'm so sorry. Thanks. I appreciate that, he said, without a hint of emotion. I inherited her house. That's why I'm here in town. I have to sort through her stuff before I sell the place. That explained why he was trying to sell all those antiques. From the photos he'd shared with her, some of the pieces were not only very old, but they were also likely worth quite a bit of money, which meant that the owner had either been lucky enough to inherit some incredible antiques, or they had been pretty well off, wealthy enough to buy a lot of amazing history. Blair wasn't 100% certain about the worth of each piece when she'd seen the photos in the coffee shop yesterday, but based on what Coulson was telling her, his great-grandmother had either been extremely lucky or upper class. Yet he hadn't said. Blair wasn't sure if she ought to be upset that he'd kept that from her or hurt that he hadn't felt like he could tell her, which was ridiculous because Coulson didn't owe her anything. She wasn't entitled to information about his family or his circumstances, but he'd hinted that a difficult childhood had been the reason. He'd never put up a Christmas tree or received gifts. It felt like the more she learned about him, the more mysterious he became. For a small-town girl like her, there weren't a lot of mysteries left to uncover around here. Most of the mysteries she was used to were in her shop, but nothing could have prepared her for a man like Coulson, a man who seemed to get by on charm and swagger. He was infuriating and cocky one minute, then sweet and complimentary the next. He could make her grit her teeth and blush at the same time. And she had only known him for a few days. Another reason he didn't owe her an explanation about his family or home life. When he'd said that he no longer thought of her as a stranger, Blair had been totally shocked. A small-town life could create a lot of intimacy and connection due to proximity and a need to survive. But she'd never thought it was possible to forge a connection that quickly with a newcomer, and certainly not a newcomer like him. Which was why she felt so anxious and giddy. There was a nervous excitement that fluttered through her whenever she saw him, a combination of desire and anticipation. That was even more intense now that they were shopping together, now that he was revealing details about his life. Yet their brief time together meant that he didn't have to give her an explanation at all. He might not have thought of her as a stranger anymore, but Blair was still skittish about relationships, about where something like this could possibly lead, about him especially. A guy like Coulson could sweep her off her feet, then break her heart. No matter what happened next, she had to steel her resolve, guard her heart, and make absolutely sure that she resisted his charm. Resisted and never gave in to it. Friendship was the best way forward. Have you been making headway with your family deciding which antiques to keep? She asked finally. It's all right to lean on people when you're grieving. Yeah, sure. Coulson looked down at the shopping cart. You came here to buy Christmas lights, right? He was changing the subject, and his motives for doing it were pretty obvious to her. After being so candid, he was going to put up that front again. Yes, the lights I kept in storage burned out. Happens every year. It's like a holiday tradition at this point, she said. Coulson reached for the top shelf and took down a box of lights like it was nothing. The top shelf was so far above her head that Blair would have had to get on her tiptoes and pray to get the lights down. "These enough?" he asked. She paused to grab her glasses and read the box. "Those are white lights. Do they have the multicolored kind? I know people think those are tacky, but I love the different colors. Could I get 2 boxes of those?" "No problem. Whatever you want." He gave her a smile that made her quiver inside. Then he grabbed a pair of boxes from the shelf and held them out for her inspection. "Yep, those are the ones," she said, nodding. He placed all 3 boxes in the cart. "Wait, I don't need the white ones, remember?" "Getting them for myself," he said. "What? You're going to put up a tree?" she asked in surprise. He shrugged and began pushing the cart again. "Not sure." "But you're thinking about it," she said, almost flailing. "Don't get too excited," he warned. "Haven't committed to anything." "I see you, Coulson. You're making a plan," she grinned at him. Coulson narrowed his green eyes, but she saw his mouth twitch, like he was suppressing a smile. "Tell you what, if I decide to decorate, you're the first person I'm calling for help."